So good evening everyone. Good evening, am I audible?
You're audible, sir.
Okay. Good evening everyone and welcome to this series of sarcoma classes. And I guess all credit goes to uh, the organizers, especially Navneet, who has been in touch with me. And we have lined up a good number of classes which I think are going to cover all your requirements for the super specialty, be it DNB, be it MCH, in all oncological specialties. We'll be starting today with evaluation of extremity mass. This is the approach that you are supposed to be having not just in your clinic when you have a patient having an extremity mass, most commonly a sarcoma, but also when you are presenting a case in an exam where an examiner expects you to have a hang of how to approach a patient who presents with an extremity mass, both clinically and by way of investigations. Of course, we will be splitting whatever I talk today is going to be split into more detail and more depth in the ensuing classes, which will involve not just radiology but also pathology and of course case presentations as we go along. We've also taken care to keep classes which concern individual specialties, for example, radiation therapy and medical oncology and surgical oncology. And some classes will be specifically pertaining to those specialties, of course, relating only to musculoskeletal oncology. I guess all DNB and MCH exams will usually have an extremity mass, and that is why it becomes extremely important that you know the basics of how to approach in terms of history taking, clinical exam, and because you're all super specialty, we expect you to be knowing the basics of history taking, how to evaluate a swelling, how to take a detailed pain history, history of pain, history of the progression of a swelling, treatment history, and will not be able, going into details regarding these subheadings. We also do not claim this class to be all inclusive, and it will be touching only the points which I thought were relevant when you are presenting or approaching a case with an extremity mass. So the basic protocol remains as in all specialties or all management groups of oncology. It has to be first diagnosis, then staging, and then management, and it can never jump or skip this protocol. This patient had a sarcoma of the proximal femur and a pathological fracture. If you go upon treating the pathological fracture first and then going on to diagnosis, this is what happens, and this is exactly the mistake was in this case, and that is how we are we should always be very careful in making the diagnosis and then thinking about management, and not the otherwise, not the other way. So it has to be diagnosis, staging, and management, and never from diagnosis to management and then staging. So the diagnosis of an extremity mass rests on three pillars. Again, all organ systems will have their own value in terms of both radiology and pathology, but it is very, very important, I think the most important out of all, in musculoskeletal oncology, particularly bone tumors and also soft tissue tumors for that matter. So the three pillars remain: clinical, radiological, and histological. And whenever you think the three are not matching, whenever you cannot put together the jigsaw puzzle, you should really question the diagnosis. If you think your clinical sense or judgment gives you a tumor which is most likely malignant, and the histology or the pathologist is giving you a diagnosis of a benign aggressive tumor, you must revisit the radiology, talk to the pathologist again, and then see whether there has been any error in the diagnosis before embarking upon management. So it's very important that all three must match. Clinical diagnosis of a malignant bone tumor, giving a histological diagnosis of a benign bone tumor should be questioned, and it usually gives you the answer. And that is how clinical examination is important, not just for exams, but your general practice as well. So when it comes to clinical, you all know that detailed history taking and examination are the two key components of this first pillar, that is clinical pillar of an extremity mass. The second pillar, of course, is radiology, and we'll be touching briefly upon radiology as to what forms the essentials of radiology. Again, we have classes which will touch upon radiology and pathology in detail. And then, of course, the third pillar, which is the histopathological diagnosis. Biopsy has to be, again, the culmination of diagnostic workup and should not be a shortcut to diagnosis. And we all must remember that it should be performed only at the conclusion of imaging workup, because imaging will tell you how to approach, what approach to take to for a biopsy of a patient. It also specifies the region of the tumor that represents the underlying disease. So the imaging might tell you which part of the tumor is most likely to give you the correct diagnosis. And of course, biopsy, if you do it before imaging, it can alter the interpretation of imaging studies. So these are the reasons why we should always perform a biopsy after imaging and not before. So when we come to our protocol, again, the diagnosis it consists of the clinical exam, radiology and histology, and staging, which again will be covering a little in detail, and then the management. So today's talk will be comprising of diagnosis and staging and not management, because diagnosis and staging essentially form the core approach to an extremity mass. As already discussed, a detailed history and good clinical exam are essential. History might clinch a lot of things for you. History of post-traumatic swelling will usually be reducing in size and severity, whereas a history of a progressively increasing mass denotes more of a neoplastic etiology. History of constitutional symptoms is again important in ruling out an infection or an osteomyelitis or a cold abscess, which again might present as an extremity mass. And this is how history differentiates between neoplastic and non-neoplastic etiologies. Again, history would be able to differentiate between a benign aggressive and a malignant swelling, because a malignant patient with a malignant swelling would be giving a history of progression in weeks to months, whereas a benign swelling might be giving a history of progression in months to years. When it comes to clinical examination, like all orthopedic examination, an extremity mass should be examined in, or rather the clinical exam should be split into inspection, palpation, movement and measurements. I am not going to touch upon all the details, but it will not be out of place to mention that an overlying skin which is shiny, tense, which has got dilated veins, most likely presents a malignant etiology. Again, if the skin shows sinuses, or it shows a sinus that denotes an abscess underlying, points more towards infection rather than a tumor. The site of the swelling also is very important. A swelling which is in the diaphysis of a bone tumor could be more likely Ewing's, whereas a one at the end of a bone, it could more likely be osteosarcoma, but these are not sacrosanct. It can always be otherwise. You can have diphyseal osteosarcomas and you can have metaphyseal Ewing sarcomas as well. Again, the number is very important. If you think you are dealing with a multifocal or multicentric disease, for example, an osteochondroma, a patient having a multiple osteochondromatosis, and at the same time having developed a chondrosarcoma in one of them, clinches the diagnosis of a secondary chondrosarcoma. So a number of swellings, even if the patient is not volunteering with the number, which is more than just one, a good inspection might clinch that diagnosis. Size of the swelling on inspection again is important, which you will be confirming on palpation and measurements. Nearby joint should always be examined. You should make a habit to have a look at the joint, because particularly bone sarcomas are most often found around the joints in the metaphyseal areas, particularly around the knee. And if you think there is fullness or effusion in the knee, it might be denoting joint involvement, which you will be confirming on your palpation and your imaging. Muscle wasting again denotes prolonged disuse of a limb, and that should again be noted on inspection. So this patient, if you only by inspection you can very well say that this is a large fungating mass, and there is scarring all around, and you are pretty sure that this is a malignancy and not benign. What do you look for in palpation? You confirm again. I would urge you to go through whatever mnemonics you have in mind, so that you do not miss. There are about 12 to 14 points that you must cover in the inspection and palpation of a swelling. ESDAS and other good clinical books very well cover these points, and you should always remember what to include, the points that you must include in the examination of a swelling. And that again holds true for an extremity swelling or a mass. But to mention the important ones, you must not forget to palpate the margins. The margins will tell you whether they are discrete or they are imperceptible, diffuse, and that differentiates a benign from malignant swelling. Again, margin which is merging into the underlying bone, or whether the margin of the swelling can be palpated separate from underlying bone, shows us whether it is a soft tissue or a bony swelling. A surface of a swelling again is important, because a lobulated or a bossulated surface probably denotes a chondroid or a chondrosarcomatous tumor rather than otherwise. Consistency of a tumor again is very important. Variegated consistency, where you see cystic areas in some, firm areas in some, and hard areas in other areas of a given swelling, you might think that this is probably malignancy rather than benign. On the other hand, a benign tumor more often will have a homogeneous consistency, whether it is soft or hard. But again, none of these points in itself is pathognomic of either benign or malignant. You have to put together the jigsaw of your inspection, palpation, history, and again imaging to put together a differential diagnosis. Whether a swelling is pulsatile or compressible also should be noted, because it might be overlying an artery or it might actually be an aneurysm. So this swelling we can very well see is arising from the medial aspect of the tibia. We can see that the overlying skin is shiny. From history, we could have the history of this growth having happened in the past few weeks to months, and we can see that there is an impending fungation of the skin. We can safely say that this is a malignant bone tumor, because this was a swelling which could not be moved over the underlying tibia, and it very well moved with the movement of the tibia. So that is how you go about, and we'll come into details later as well. Movements again are very important. Like all extremity examinations, movement of the adjoining joints. For example, a swelling in the distal femur, you would want to examine the knee joint and the hip joint, particularly the knee if it's the distal femur. Whether the movement is complete or not, it must be compared with the opposite side, and then we could know whether there is any restriction. If the restriction is global, which means it is painful right from the beginning, and it is restricted, painful all through the range of motion, then probably denotes a direct invasion of the joint. by the tumor, whereas sometimes it can be painless to start with and then terminally restricted. For example, in an extra-articular swelling in the popliteal area might cause a restriction of knee flexion, and that initially will be just painless as any normal knee, and then there is sudden restriction at the end of flexion, and that is how you could say that this restriction is probably not because of joint invasion, but because of an extra-articular swelling. Then comes the measurement, which again forms an integral part of your examination. You must measure limb length because the length of the bone will be shortened in case there has been a pathological fracture, particularly in patients where the fracture has healed because of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Your limb length is the only thing that's going to indicate there has been some collapse or some displacement of a fracture, and this would usually lead to shortening of that bone. And you usually would want to reproduce the length of the bone by knowing the length of the opposite side of the bone, and that is where measuring the limb length or the length of the bone becomes important. A circumferential measurement of the tumor is again also very important. The safest way of doing this is to measure the circumference of the extremity at the maximum bulge of the tumor. Measure this point or this line from the nearest bony landmark. For example, if it's a distal femoral swelling, you might want to mark the joint line, which is the junction between the femur and the tibia, and then measure the distance of your circumferential swelling from that point. Measure the opposite leg at exactly the same point, and that will give you the difference between the two limbs. And that is how you note down your circumferential measurement. Why is it important? It is important because number one, it gives you an idea of the presence of a tumor, and more importantly, it gives you a baseline against which you can compare the response of any neoadjuvant therapy that you are going to offer to the patient. So if you measure the circumferential measurement at the beginning of chemo and then you again measure it just before surgery, you can say even by clinical examination that the response to neoadjuvant chemotherapy has been good. You would also want to measure the size of a swelling. When in palpation you have noted that the swelling is so and so size, but then you would want sometimes to use your scale to exactly measure how big the swelling is. So once you have gone through your history and examination, what are the questions that you want should be answered, or what are the questions that anyone would want be answered in the approach to an extremity mass? The first question is whether it is neoplastic or something else. Not all extremity masses will be neoplastic or sarcomas or benign tumors. There will be swellings which are inflammatory, which are traumatic. How do we differentiate between the two? A history of trauma is extremely important, but a word of caution here, most patients will anyways give a history of trauma in especially a bone tumor and sometimes even soft tissue sarcomas. What usually happens is this is an insignificant trauma which could be having hit the leg on a piece of on a table or on a wall or a door, and then patient reports having developed that swelling. What this trauma usually does is to just draw the attention of the patient to that swelling, and we should be smart enough to differentiate between trauma that has actually caused that swelling versus trauma that just brought the attention of the patient towards that swelling. But yes, a history of trauma sometimes rules out pathologies like even a fracture or a stress fracture or a callus or even myositis. So these are things which can, these are swellings which can just be out of history of trauma. And that is where we might clinch a diagnosis and rule out unnecessary investigations. A history of constitutional symptoms again will be pointing towards an infective origin. If a patient reports high-grade fever and then suddenly he develops a severely painful red swelling at the end of a bone, it is more likely, particularly in a child, it is more likely to be an osteomyelitis rather than tumor. The course of symptoms again is important. As I mentioned, a post-traumatic swelling will usually get better with time because the body starts to heal it. If it's a stress fracture, a patient gives a history of a prolonged walking, and sometimes a swelling develops, say, over the tibia. You will want to ask whether how the swelling appeared. The patient will give a history of an unaccustomed walking of many kilometers on a particular day, and then he started developing that swelling and pain. But if you really dig deeper, you'll realize that the swelling and the pain have been gradually subsiding over the last 1 month or so. So a pain which is coming down, swelling which is coming down with time, more likely points towards a traumatic origin. But again, a single point can never lead to a diagnosis, and we need to just put all pieces together. A history of a discharging sinus obviously points towards osteomyelitis or tubercular osteomyelitis, or could be a pyogenic osteomyelitis. A contact history with TB again is important. So just to emphasize my point, this patient presented with a large swelling. We can see here it's a soft tissue swelling. Again, we can see the soft tissue swelling. This is a soft tissue swelling, but there is a huge edema which is out of proportion to this swelling. And on asking more, we could see that the patient actually gave a history of trauma, which led to myositis. All the patient required was more follow-up imaging, and we could see that the myositis gradually ossified, and this patient did not even require a biopsy. So that is how history becomes very important. The next question, now having answered whether it is neoplastic or otherwise, you would want to know whether it is arising from the bone or the soft tissue. A history of pain is usually more common in bony tumors rather than soft tissue tumors. Having said that, there will always be some soft tissue tumors like the synovial sarcoma or a malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, which will be painful. Or for that matter, any soft tissue tumor which is impinging on a nerve will have pain. On the other hand, sometimes you can have slow growing bone tumors which are painless, but generally pain is more common in bony tumors rather than soft tissue tumors. Whether the swelling on examination is separable from underlying bone or not, you would want to catch hold of the swelling either with 1 or 2 hands and gently try to move the swelling over the underlying bone, provided the swelling is not very painful, and that will give you a hint whether the swelling is actually arising from bone or from soft tissue. Again, if you can, number one, if you can insinuate your finger between the swelling on the bone, or you can move the swelling over the underlying bone, it is more likely to be soft tissue. And if it cannot be moved over the bone, it is more likely to be bony. But yet again, soft tissue sarcoma which invades bone will become immobile, and that is where we need to be careful. So mobility from muscle contraction is also important. A swelling which reduces in size upon contracting that muscle is probably arising from within the muscle or deeper to that muscle. If a swelling accentuates or becomes more prominent upon contraction of a muscle, then it is lying above that muscle. So this again on clinical exam will give us an idea as to whether a soft tissue swelling is actually soft tissue, number one, and the level or the depth of the swelling that is there. A superficial swelling will become more prominent if it's superficial to the muscle, and if it will become less prominent or become inconspicuous if it is deeper to the muscle. This we have already discussed, change in size with muscle contraction. So once you have kind of did your clinical examination to see whether it is number one, it is neoplastic or not, number two, whether it is from the bone or the soft tissue, the third thing that you would want to know is whether it is benign or malignant. And again, your history and clinical exam will give you these hints. Duration of symptoms, if it's weeks to months, more likely malignant. If it's months to years, most likely benign. Pain, again, if it's painful, in case of a bone tumor, the more the pain, the more likely it is to be malignant, unless there has been a pathological fracture. In fact, malignant bone tumors quite often are present with pain first and swelling later. So a patient first having pain and then having swelling is quite likely to have a malignant bone tumor, whereas a soft tissue sarcoma, as we already discussed, might actually remain painless over the course, even if it grows to large sizes. Size of a swelling again is an indication. A swelling which is more than 5 centimeters is to be usually considered malignant unless proven otherwise. So all swellings in an extremity which are deeper to deep fascia, which are more than 5 centimeters in size, which are progressively increasing either on clinical exam or on imaging, are to be considered malignant unless proven otherwise. So this is a very important way of differentiating a benign from a malignant swelling. A fungation usually denotes malignancy, and again margins or zone of transition, a margin of a swelling on palpation, if it is very difficult to perceive and imperceptibly merges in the surrounding tissues, be it the bone or the soft tissue, it is more likely to be malignant. Similarly, on radiology, particularly on X-rays of a bone tumor, if the zone of transition where it is the area or the border where the normal bone stops and the tumor starts, if the zone of transition is wide, you are more likely dealing with a malignancy or a malignant bone tumor. All these points, of course, on X-rays will be covered later in later classes. Consistency is another indicator. A consistency which is homogeneous is more likely to be benign. A consistency which is variegated, which means cystic in some areas, fluctuate in some areas, soft in some areas, and firm or hard in other areas, is most likely a malignant swelling. Treatment history is again of extreme importance. If a patient gives a history of treatment suggestive of chemotherapy which caused hair loss, or which involved administration of injections repeatedly in cycles, you are probably looking at a malignancy, and that is also something that you should note. So once you have decided that it is neoplastic, it is bone or soft tissue, or it is benign or malignant, you would want to know whether there is a neurological involvement. All patients should, of course, as part of a clinical examination, should undergo thorough neurological examination, and you should always be aware of the major nerves of both the upper and the lower limbs, and how to examine or carry out a neurological examination. The pattern of pain on history is again very important. If there are paresthesias, there is radiation of pain. The pain radiates, for example, in a gluteal swelling, that there is pain in the calf or in the sole. It is most likely involving directly or maybe pressing or compressing the sciatic nerve. Similarly, if there is a swelling in the medial arm and the patient is having paresthesias in the little finger, probably there is ulnar nerve involvement. So a pattern of pain is again very important when you are looking at evaluating the neurological status of a patient with an extremity mass. Ability to walk, again you might ask the patient whether he has been walking in the case of a lower limb, or whether he has been using the upper limb in case of an upper limb extremity mass, to know whether there is probably a neurological involvement or not. The next thing, of course, is vascular involvement, and that is where you will want to check the pulsations. Usually veins will be compressed before arteries, and patients will usually have pedal edema much before they have arterial involvement. So pedal edema, if a patient is having, you are probably looking at a situation where the mass is causing some compromise of the vascular status. Distal pulsations should always be noted carefully, and again compared with normal side. If you have a pulsation which is feeble and the normal side is showing good pulsation, it is only then that you can say that probably there is actual or impending vascular involvement. A patient who gives a history of claudication or of gangrene, of course, indicates vascular involvement. The next step in your evaluation will be imaging, and you always start, because by now you have zeroed down on whether it's a bony swelling or a soft tissue swelling. You would want to start with an X-ray in case of bone. CT scans you will choose when you think you need a good cortical detail, a good detail of a bony tumor in terms of just the mineralized portion. CT scan does not give you very good idea about bone marrow involvement, about skip lesions, about the vascular or a neurovascular involvement or the soft tissue component. But CT scan does give you good idea about the osseous detail. For example, if you are suspecting a case of a chondrosarcoma and you want to look at punctate calcifications, they may not be visible on X-rays, but they might be visible on CT scans. Similarly, there are certain bones where X-rays do not give a very good information. These bones are, for example, the sternum, the scapula, or the sacrum, where instead of an X-ray, you would want to prefer a CT scan. But the most important investigation for any extremity mass is an MRI. You can quite often omit an CT scan, even for a bony swelling, if you have a good X-ray in the AP and lateral views, and an MRI. So the MRI is the most important thing, whether it's a soft tissue swelling or a bony swelling. In case of a bony swelling, it will give you the extent of marrow involved, the neurovascular bundle status, the soft tissue involvement, and so on and so forth. An ultrasound might sometimes prove handy in case you want to look for some details, but generally in the presence of MRI, you do not need an ultrasound. As we discussed, X-ray forms a very important part of the bone malignancy evaluation, and we'll of course have a separate class on X-rays and MRIs. But I must mention here that an adequate imaging is something that you must always keep in mind. Always have the whole compartment evaluated in your imaging. For example, if it's the proximal femur, you must include both the hip and the knee for your evaluation for both X-rays and MRIs. Similarly, if it's the distal tibia, you must involve the whole of the tibia in your radiological evaluation. There should always be a measurement scale on the MRI because you would want to have those measurements for your pre-operative planning and evaluation. So as discussed, MRI will show you marrow involvement, skip lesions. It might sometimes characterize the lesion as well. For example, a chondroid lesion has a very typical imaging on MRI, and you might sometimes just diagnose a chondrosarcoma on the MRI imaging characteristics. Similarly, fluid levels, if you can see, might denote an aneurysmal bone cyst or a telangiectatic osteosarcoma, or at least a very vascular tumor, if not anything else. It gives you excellent relation of neurovascular bundle, whether it is free, away, or partially encased or fully encased. MRI gives you a very good detailed information regarding the neurovascular bundle involvement. Soft tissue component of a bony tumor again is very well shown by the MRI, and the involvement of the surrounding muscles, which will again form part of your pre-operative planning, is very well seen on MRIs. MRI also helps you plan the biopsy, and this is because you want to always approach the soft tissue component of a bone tumor for biopsy. And dynamic contrast enhanced MRI can also denote activity of a lesion and sometimes give you the exact area where you want to go for biopsy. A CT scan in terms of local imaging, as we discussed, for cortical lesions or for osseous detail, and sometimes even matrix calcification. But on the other hand, it's extremely important to detect or rule out pulmonary metastasis. it will be prudent to remember that for the purpose of evaluation of pulmonary metastasis, a non-contrast or plain CT scan is just enough, because the air is there as a contrast for us. So if you are ordering a CT scan for metastatic evaluation of a sarcoma, you order a plain CT scan and not a contrast enhanced CT scan of the chest. PET scan is gaining popularity for staging, for detecting sarcomatous transformation in pre-existing lesions. It has got possible role in cartilaginous tumors, and it also is important in evaluating the response to preoperative chemotherapy. Then comes biopsy. Once you have done your good clinical exam, you are sure that it's a neoplastic swelling or a tumor. You are also sure that it's a bone or soft tissue, and you have also seen that it's benign or malignant. So by now you have a fair idea, and you've also had your imaging. You've got a fair idea that this the patient that you're dealing with is probably a malignant tumor of bone, of so and so location, and of course that will all depend on the case that you are with. Once you are done with your clinical exam, history, imaging, the next step that culminates the evaluation is the biopsy. And this is something very important in the context of extremity sarcomas, and we always should remember that there are certain principles of biopsy that we must follow. The number one principle is that we must follow the rules of imaging. As already discussed, all imaging should be done before and not after biopsy. So all imaging, whether it is all local imaging in the form of X-ray and MRI, should be done before you contemplate biopsy. And the reason for this, as we've already discussed, is that it gives you the safe corridor where you want to approach the lesion for your biopsy. It also avoids the possibility of biopsy altering the imaging should you do imaging after biopsy. And then imaging also gives you the exact area of the tumor, because sarcomas are heterogeneous. They'll be cystic or necrotic in some areas or solid in other areas. So MRI will give you the location where you should target your biopsy. So all imaging should be done before biopsy. Again, image the whole bone in case of bone tumor, and image the whole compartment or the whole muscle compartment in case of a soft tissue tumor, whether you're doing an X-ray for a bone tumor or an MRI for a bone or a soft tissue sarcoma. The whole compartment, the whole muscle compartment or the whole bone must undergo imaging. Again, staging workup should always be done before treatment, and we'll come to that. In case you are at a center where treatment of sarcomas is not carried out, you do not have the expertise of carrying out limb salvage surgeries or other treatment of sarcomas, or even for that matter you do not have the expertise of good radiology or pathology, you might want to refer such a patient to a higher center before biopsy and not after that. If you think you are not going to perform the final treatment, probably you are not the one who should be performing the biopsy. Of course, we should remember to use image guidance. Sometimes CM guidance is enough in case of bone tumors, in case of soft tissue sarcomas which are not clinically palpable or which are deep, or where you're not confident that you can avoid the neurovascular bundle or other critical areas during a blind biopsy. You might want to go for image guidance, which can be a CT guidance or ultrasound guidance as well. Sometimes a PET scan might guide you to a more PET avid area, where especially where you think the mass is heterogeneous in terms of avidity. You might want to direct your biopsy to a more PET avid area in order to increase the chances of a positive outcome of a biopsy. So which biopsy technique to use? We all are using either core biopsy, a core needle biopsy for bone tumors, and a true cut biopsy for a soft tissue sarcoma for the majority of our cases. Reasons are simple to understand. It is possible to do them under local anesthesia on an OPD basis. It is having a least complication rate, and the days of open biopsy are almost over. But however, if you are at a center where open biopsies are performed. As long as you perform them keeping the principles in mind, it is also acceptable to have an open biopsy. So in case of both open and needle biopsies, there are certain things that you must remember. Biopsy incision should be in line with the final incision of surgery, which is why it is always said, and you can never overemphasize this fact, that biopsy should always be performed by a surgeon who is conversant with limb salvage surgeries, because the track of the biopsy is supposed to be contaminated with tumor cells, and the biopsy tract needs to be excised when the final limb salvage surgery is done. And this is possible only if it is in line with that incision. As you can see here, a careful placement of biopsy incision will enable the surgeon to remove the biopsy tract when the final surgery is being performed. It will be wise to remember what all areas or corridors of biopsies are available in cases of tumors at different locations. If we talk of bone tumors, in cases of proximal femur, for a tumor like this, you want to go from the lateral side. In case of distal femur, you might want to go either from lateral or medial, depending on the soft tissue component. If the soft tissue component is available on both sides, you might want to choose either lateral or medial, depending on your familiarity. Similarly, for proximal tibia, you might want to go anterolaterally or anteromedially, depending on where the soft tissue of the bone tumor is. For the shoulder, you do not use the deltopectoral groove. You actually enter through the deltoid, the anterior part of the deltoid, so that the whole biopsy tract is contained within one muscle and does not contaminate two muscles. So what are the things you want to avoid when you are performing a biopsy? You can see here, if there is a tumor in the distal femur on the popliteal aspect or the posterior aspect, you might want to avoid contaminating the joint. You might want to avoid contaminating the neurovascular bundle. You also do not want to contaminate normal bone. You do not want to go through normal bone and then reach this lesion, because then you will be contaminating all the uninvolved bone as well. So what you want to do is either lateral or medial, just brushing the outer surface of the bone and take that biopsy. Again, you also do not want to contaminate multiple muscle compartments. So you want to make sure that you enter just one muscle if possible and take a biopsy through that, rather than contaminating two or more muscles with your biopsy. When you are doing an open biopsy, we must avoid raising flaps, avoid using retractors if possible. It should be a sharp and direct approach. Again, breach a single compartment. A good hemostasis is absolutely necessary. We must avoid drains if at all possible, because again the drain site is going to be potentially contaminated with tumor cells, and that will also have to be included in your final surgery scar. So if at all you have to put drain, it should be distal and not proximal to the biopsy, and again in line with the longitudinal incision. All open biopsy scars, if at all to be done, should be longitudinal and never transverse. There is no role for transverse scars in extremities as far as bone and soft tissue sarcomas are concerned. Suture placement should be close to scar, because again all the suture marks will have to be excised, unblocked when you are doing the definitive surgery. Try representative areas, read your imaging carefully, avoid the cystic or necrotic areas, and that is why having a good contrast enhanced MRI, remember the MRI should always be contrast enhanced in cases of bone and soft tissue tumors, and that is where it helps us in differentiating between areas which are more likely to give you a fruitful outcome should you biopsy them. Before going on to the next question, which is staging, I re-emphasize that needle biopsy, a core needle biopsy for bone tumors and a token biopsy for soft tissue sarcomas is the gold standard now. The eighth question that comes when you are going about evaluating a bone tumor is staging. You might want to follow either Enneking staging or AJCC staging, and it's all for everyone to see in the textbooks. What are the modalities that you think are bare minimum? For a sarcoma of soft tissue, a CT scan of the chest is a bare minimum when you want to go for metastatic workup. But in cases with bone sarcomas, usually you want to add a bone scan to a CT scan of the chest in case you are planning to stage a patient with a bone sarcoma. So a bone sarcoma, CT chest plus bone scan, and a soft tissue sarcoma, CT scan of the chest. In addition to these, there might be situations where you want to go for something more. For example, an MRI of the spine in cases where you have a myxoid liposarcoma of an extremity where a spinal mets are known to happen, or you might want to go for an MRI of a brain in an angiosarcoma where brain mets can happen, or you want to evaluate the regional lymph nodes by way of either ultrasound or a PET scan. In certain histologies of soft tissue sarcomas, for example, the synovial sarcomas, the rhabdomyosarcomas, or the epithelioid sarcomas, or the angiosarcomas. A CT abdomen might sometimes come in handy if you want to rule out, again in case of a myxoid liposarcoma, if you want to rule out a coexisting retroperitoneal liposarcoma. So these are situations where you might want to go beyond the routine CT chest in your metastatic workup. Again, if I go back in cases with the Ewing sarcoma or rhabdomyosarcoma, you want to go for marrow assessment as well. And that is where PET scan is gaining popularity, particularly for Ewing sarcoma. You want to go for a PET CT, which will avoid the need for both CT scan of chest, bone scan, as well as bone marrow. So just to recapitulate, Enneking staging differentiates between intra and extra compartmental disease. I must touch upon something about what Enneking means with compartments. These are not the usual anatomical compartments. These are organs or areas which are enclosed by barriers to sarcoma spread. For example, if you have a bone, that bone is enclosed by a layer of periosteum, and periosteum is a barrier to sarcoma. So one whole bone becomes one compartment for Enneking. Similarly, a muscle compartment in a thigh or a leg is enclosed on all sides by either intermuscular septa or the deep fascia. And these facial layers are again barriers to sarcoma spread. So that becomes a compartment in, if you go by the Enneking system. Similarly, a joint is another compartment which is enclosed by the joint capsule, which again is a very good barrier to sarcoma spread. So compartments, when you talk of Enneking classification, actually mean organs which are enclosed or surrounded by a barrier to sarcoma spread. And that is where intra or extra compartmental becomes important. If there is a sarcoma of bone which is purely intraosseous, causing nothing to the cortex or the periosteum, it becomes an intercompartmental disease, that is T1. And in cases where the tumor has breached the periosteum, it becomes extracompartmental, which is T2. Again, grades have been divided into low and high, and metastatic disease in M0 and M1, and that is how you go about staging bone and soft tissue tumors as per the Enneking system. So as I said, tumor which is purely intracompartmental versus a tumor which is extracompartmental will be staged differently by Enneking, irrespective of the size of the tumor. If you go by AJCC system, you actually look at the size, the regional lymph nodes, and presence of metastasis and the grade. and then you divide as you do, you stage the patient into 1, 2, 3, and 4. After you stage the patient, because staging is very important, I want to touch two more things which are very, again, very essential for evaluation of a patient with extremity sarcoma. Even if these are more relevant from the surgeon's point of view, I think every one of us should be aware of these points. One is preoperative evaluation. Once you have gone through all this, what are the points that you want to pick up and use for your operative planning? If you look at an extremity soft tissue sarcoma, for example, it will usually be limited by either the skin. You can see the skin is involved. So you want to know whether the skin is involved or not. Whether it is involving the bone, it is involving the periosteum, or actually invading the bone. After your clinical examination and imaging, you should be able to have all these answers pretty correctly. Again, the joint, whether it is invaded or not, should be this information should be available with you. And then others, for example, the involvement of the neurovascular bundle. If you can see there is partial encasement, you know that you might still get away with the R0 resection. And again, the principles of resection will be covered in a later class. But these are things that form your preoperative evaluation. So you want to know whether if the patient has undergone a previous unplanned surgery, it's not just involvement of the presence of the scar, the involvement of the skin, but also the derm marks that are there. Because if you miss them, you're likely to leave your resection less than optimal, because the brain sites is definitely going to be contaminated with tumor cells if the previous surgery was intralesional or piecemeal. In cases with soft tissue sarcomas, how do we know that the bone is involved, whether it is directly involved? If there is direct involvement or invasion of bone, you will not be able to move the sarcoma or the mass over the underlying bone. MRI will show signal changes in the bone itself. The bone scan will show the absence of periosteal uptake, and that is where you go for an unblocked excision of not just the soft tissue sarcoma but also the bone along with it. If there is involvement of bone, you might want to consider prophylactic fixation. In fact, in patients who are having bone tumors involving the femur, or rather soft tissue sarcoma involving the thigh, if there is periosteal stripping of the femur, you might want to consider prophylactic fixation, because there is a certain risk of post-radiation fracture in femurs where periosteum was stripped during excision of a soft tissue sarcoma. So all this forms part of your pre-op evaluation. This patient had, as you can see, direct invasion or involvement of bone, and that is why a pre-op planning of not just a sarcoma excision but also replacement of the proximal femur was made. Again, a vicinity to the joint it forms part of your pre-op evaluation. For example, the capsule is a thick barrier, and this myxoid liposarcoma previously excised, we can see is lying just outside the ankle joint, and because the joint capsule is a good barrier, we could get away with by using that the capsule as your margin. And that's how it was reconstructed with a free flap. If there is direct joint invasion, you have to consider extraarticular resection, where you sacrifice the whole joint, both the adjoining bones, and also the muscles that are covering. And in these situations, because you lose a lot of bone, you might want to consider not using a prosthesis but a fixed joint in the form of an arthrodesis. For example, we can see here that the joint was invaded. You resect the whole joint without opening the joint, and go for a reconstruction which does not require the quadriceps function, which is an arthrodesis. Proximity to vessels again should be well planned. If in cases where the abutment is less than 180 degrees, we can get away by opening the vascular sheath And again, in another class, you will be shown how we can use the concept of barriers in planning resection of sarcomas. But it will suffice to say here that the vascular sheath again is a barrier to sarcoma, and if there is not, if there is less than 180-degree abutment or encasement, you might still want to save the limb by saving that vessel. But if there is complete encasement, the vessels, either you choose amputation or you choose a vascular graft. For example, here we can see there was involvement of the femoral vessels, and a patch grafting was done to reconstruct the vessels. The nerve, again, upper limb versus lower limb, we have different principles. Involvement of even one, sparing of even one nerve in the upper limb is indication for limb salvage, because even a function of a small hook of a finger is better than any prosthesis in the world that can be used when amputation of an upper limb is concerned. So the threshold for salvaging a limb in cases of upper limb is very, very low. Even in the presence of one nerve, the upper limb is well worth salvaging. Again, the epineurium of a nerve is a good barrier, and that is where we can again salvage by saving the nerve. You might also want to involve your reconstructive surgeon or the vascular surgeon where you think you will not have adequate soft tissue cover, and this is quite often required in soft tissue sarcomas. This soft tissue sarcoma of thigh, unless you plan well with your reconstructive surgeon, the outcome cannot be good. Similarly, a synovial sarcoma of the wrist, regional flap, and excision. So once you have done your pre-operative workup, pre-operative counseling also forms part of your evaluation of an extremity mass. It cannot be overemphasized or overstressed that counseling of a patient, particularly of a bone sarcoma, is very, very important, and you have to counsel the patient not once, not twice, but many times, and that becomes easy for you when the patient is undergoing neoadjuvant chemotherapy. You have got the chance to see the patient time and again, because there are many things that that you might want to think and discuss with the patient when you are planning the reconstruction part of a limb salvage surgery. So all routine investigations you always want, and you want to look at the surgical risk. You want to have a look at the socioeconomic profile of the patient. A patient who is a laborer, a manual laborer, might do well, might do better with an arthrodesis of the knee rather than a prosthesis. Whereas a sedentary worker who has nothing, no manual labor to do and sits on the chair all through the day, might want to go for a prosthesis. Similarly, a body weight which is very high should go with a word of caution as far as the longevity of the prosthesis is concerned. Reconstruction, as I said, should be discussed with the patient, whether you want to address the limb length discrepancy issue, whether you want to discuss the longevity of reconstruction, whether you want to discuss the mobility of the joint, and so on and so forth. So all this forms part of your pre-operative counseling of the patient. Activity restriction is another thing which you must discuss, especially in cases with young children where compliance can be an issue, or even for adults for that matter, where you think compliance might be an issue. You might want to offer a reconstruction which does not require restriction of activities. The need for flaps, particularly in cases of soft tissue sarcomas, should always be discussed in conjunction with the reconstructive surgeon, and the patient should be aware of the options of soft tissue reconstruction and the various flaps. And these flaps or the reconstructive surgery will also take into account the surgical risk of the patient. So let us go through a couple of cases where we see that we can apply these principles in coming to a diagnosis. This is a 22 years old female. She's got pain and swelling of the right gluteus region. There is no neurovascular deficit. On palpation, the swelling is formed to hard. The duration of the symptoms is more than 1 year. and this is the X-ray. I do not have the clinical picture here, but the swelling was quite hard, and going by the imaging, the clinical history, we could easily say that this is a benign aggressive tumor of the bone because of the duration, which was more than 1 year, and the consistency, which was homogeneously hard. This on biopsy came out to be a giant cell tumor of the iliac bone. Another patient we can see is a 60 years female who had complaint of pain and swelling of just 1 month duration, which has been rapidly progressing, and this mass which could easily move over the underlying iliac bone. This is the gluteal area, and going by the history, the duration, we can easily say that it's a malignant swelling of the soft tissues not involving the bone, and the imaging was done to confirm that for the most part it is cystic and the tumorous portion is just here. So this is a soft tissue sarcoma of the gluteal region. Again, from the imaging we can say that it's quite vascular, and pre-op embolization might form part of your preoperative planning. Another case where the patient complained of pain followed by swelling. So this patient had pain first and swelling later, and you can see this is the iliac blade, and that's the thigh, and that's the swelling on the lateral aspect of the proximal femur. Duration was about 3 months. The patient reported inability to walk, and there was also a flexion deformity of the hip. The size, as we can see, is about 15 centimeters. The margins were imperceptibly merging with the underlying femur, and when we rotate the hip, you holding the femur at the knee, the swelling was rotating along with the femur. The consistency was hard in some places and firm in others, and this is how you could easily come to a diagnosis of a malignant bone tumor of the proximal femur. And this is the MRI that completes your evaluation as far as the local disease is concerned. So that brings us to this brief talk on how to approach an extremity mass, and I will be happy to take any questions. I will say once again here that most of these things will be covered in later classes. The purpose of this particular class was to apprise you of how to put the pieces of the jigsaw together when you are trying to approach or evaluate a patient with an extremity mass. And this is how you should be forming your initial impression of a patient who has an extremity tumor. And then of course you go about imaging, biopsy, staging, and further management. So Navneet, my talk ends here, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a wonderful class, and there are questions in the chat box, sir.
Okay. So from Bharat Nandu, please share future class details. Of course, Navneet will do that. From Shraddha, rationale for a joint above and below imaging. Can you please give some idea of skip lesions in these cases? Is CECT better than NCCT thorax if given an option between both? Role of PET CT. Very good questions. So rationale for a joint above and below imaging. I think I will go back to the previous slides where I can show you what happens if you image just the involved portion. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. So you can see that this is how the usual X-ray is done, and you can see the proximal end of the tibia is showing obviously malignant bone tumor, most likely an osteosarcoma. But if you image the whole bone, you see that there is a skip lesion lying here. Now, if you do not image the whole bone, particularly with the MRI that you are going to do to plan your surgery, you might end up missing this skip lesion. Suppose this patient underwent a bone scan and a CT chest. Usually a bone scan is done only up to the mid thigh. This patient would have missed this skip lesion altogether, and or the surgeon would have missed this skip lesion altogether. So it is essential to have an MRI which includes the whole bone, and the whole bone because skip metastasis, for the benefit of everyone, what is the difference between skip metastasis and a satellite nodule? A skip metastasis is a deposit of disease in the same Anakin compartment, but separated from the primary tumor by normal tissue. For example, this will be called a skip metastasis because it is involving the same bone, not a different bone, but it is separated from the main tumor by normal bone. If there are deposits which always are there in cases with high-grade sarcomas, just in the vicinity, just outside or within the pseudocapsule, that is what is called satellite nodules. Now, a skip lesion like this will be missed if you fail to evaluate the whole compartment. The whole compartment means, in this case, the whole of tibia. In the case of a soft tissue sarcoma in the quadriceps muscle, it will mean the anterior compartment of the thigh. The next question is some idea of skip lesions. I have already given that. Is CECT better than NCCT if given an option between both? So, a pulmonary metastasis in cases with sarcoma are usually parenchymal lesions. You are not looking at the mediastinal structures, you are not looking at the lymph nodes, and that is why non-contrast plain CT will just give you as much information as a contrast CT will. If you ask, is CECT worse than NCCT? No. If it's a CECT, fine. But even a non-contrast CT will work just as well as a contrast and NCT scan. A role of PET CT we've already discussed. In cases of soft tissue sarcomas where you want to evaluate the regional lymph node, you want to evaluate the spine, and this, as I discussed, applies to particular histologies, you might want to go for a PET scan. Similarly, for rhabdomyosarcomas and for Ewing sarcoma, PET scan definitely has more role than other sarcomas. But if you are asked, if someone asks you the basic imaging that should form the part of staging for sarcomas, it has to be plain CT chest and a bone scan for bone sarcomas, a plain CT chest and a bone scan along with bone marrow biopsy for Ewing sarcoma, and a plain CT chest with or without regional lymph node involvement for a soft tissue sarcoma. I think that will form your basic metastatic workup for a sarcoma. Okay, the next question is, can biopsy lead to tumor spread? No, it does not. It only leads to contamination of the tract that the biopsy is used for, and that needs to be excised in the final surgery. In fact, no treatment of cancer can be started without a biopsy. So we need to make all the laymen or the patients aware that biopsy does not harm a patient if performed the right way, which is why it is so important, particularly for sarcomas, that biopsy should be done at centers where these surgeries are routinely done. Can surgery change if biopsy not performed properly? Yes, if the biopsy is performed from the wrong route. Suppose you contaminate the joint while performing the biopsy, you end up removing the whole joint rather than going through the joint, and your reconstruction changes. Similarly, a biopsy which is performed through the gluteal muscle will lead to excision of the whole gluteal mass, whereas a properly performed biopsy, you could have saved it. Sometimes biopsy might even lead to amputation in patients where limb salvage would have been possible. In fact, this phenomenon is prevalent not just in India but everywhere in the world, and we sarcoma surgeons keep reminding all of the fraternities that please be very careful when you are planning and executing a biopsy of a patient with a suspected malignancy of bone or muscle. Future classes details, Navneet will share. So how to measure true and apparent length of limb? I think that is hardcore orthopedic examination and it's there in all textbooks. Just shortly, apparent and true length applies mostly in cases where you cannot actually measure the bone itself, and that happens when the joint in question is very deep. For example, the hip and sometimes the shoulder. For the hip, you cannot put a measuring tape on the femoral head. You can do so for the femoral condyle, but not for the femoral head. So what do? You measure your limb length from the anterior superior iliac spine to the medial joint line. Now, because this is an indirect way of measuring limb length, it might change with the position of the limb. So when you want to measure apparent length, you keep both the lower limbs parallel to each other, and from the ASIS you measure the medial joint line on both sides, that is your apparent length. When you want to measure the true length, you need to do what is called squaring of the pelvis, where you make sure both the anterior superior iliac spines at the same level, and this happens when there is abduction or adduction deformity of the hip. And I think that is not going to be very relevant when you have a case of bone tumor or a soft tissue sarcoma. If a lower femur lesion is seen in upper tibial tumor, will be a skip lesion of METS. Very good question. It might happen in two ways. Suppose there is a lower femoral lesion, so it's an upper tibial tumor, right? If there is involvement, so we know that the two are connected with median and lateral collateral ligaments and also by way of cruciate ligaments. So if there is involvement by contiguous growth along one of these ligaments, it will be called a skip lesion, or even a growth along a locally advanced lesion where there has been growth along the ligaments. For example, if there is a proximal tibial or upper tibial tumor and there is involvement of medial collateral ligament, and then it has gone on to involve along the joint capsule, it has involved the femur, it will not be called a metastasis. But if there is a upper tibial tumor and all the intervening joint capsule, cruciate ligaments are all clean with no evidence of disease, and the joint also does not show any evidence of disease, and there is a discrete different distal femoral lesion, it will be called a metastatic lesion and not a skip lesion. I hope I have made myself clear. Role of bone marrow biopsy and indication. Bone marrow biopsy is indicated only for Ewing sarcoma as far as bone tumors are concerned. That is because bone marrow metastasis are known to happen in Ewing sarcoma, but not in other sarcomas of bone such as osteo or chondrosarcomas. Nowadays, most people will omit a bone marrow biopsy if the patient has undergone a whole body PET CT. So is that it? Any more questions? So we will be very happy, and I think Navneet can make note of that. We'll be very happy to have any more feedbacks as to what classes you think are going to add more value to your time. We'll be happy to incorporate those. We've got the best faculty across the country, and this let me put on record here that this is in an effort of the Delhi Musculoskeletal Oncology Group. This is a group of people in Delhi and NCR who are passionate about sarcoma treatment, and we will be happy to incorporate any particular class that you think is necessary for your purpose. I think if that is all, we'll just call it a day. Navneet?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. It was really a wonderful class, and I'm really thankful sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, then see you around for the next class. Thank you everyone and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Nice.